Have you seen this man? Armed and dangerous with his bottle of Lucozade Sport. Needs to be arrested for walking under the influence of it. But of course, you didn't come here for a little bit of comedy about my addiction to Lucozade Sport, or if I'm going to get a criminal record. No. Afternoon, everyone. I'm here because I want to talk about a couple of things. First and foremost, Nigel Farage. Some of you will know that I wouldn't say I've been an avid supporter of Nigel Farage, but I do support a lot of what he says. He was the, well, do I say infamous MEP or famous MEP? Anyway, he was the guy who, when we were still part of the EU, he was on the front lines knocking 7 shades of shit out of Brussels and its unelected bureaucrats. You know, the people that you and I couldn't get rid of or vote to replace them or whatever. We had no control of that. But I digress. Nigel Farage has recently mentioned in his little 30-second clip or whatever it was that he was apparently heading to Thrills with a Z. And as soon as I heard the name, I was like, oh God, here we go again. And I think just about anybody else would have that kind of opinion. Anyway, this is apparently a website where basically celebrities sell their souls out for a few £100 to give people a personalised message from the celebrities. And I think to myself, why? That's literally my fucking thoughts on this. Or thoughts with a T, not F. Anyway, that's my thoughts on this. Why? Because last time I checked, Nigel Farage was a bloody good speaker, regardless of whether or not you like his politics. But he could always drill up a crowd. He had charisma in bounds. And yet, here he is saying he's going to go to Thriller. For God knows what reason. For those of you who don't know Farage, he started up in the metals business, selling metals like lead, zinc and iron. And then he made his way up to politics, where he basically wanted us out of the EU. Not Europe, the EU. For any Ramona that is still thinking about it like that. But he wanted us out of the European Union. Fundamentally because it was anti-democratic and that it goes against the British people. And, as I've mentioned before, if the people who voted in the vote in the 1970s or late 60s or what have you, when Edward Heath was around, you know, the lying twat who sold us the lie that basically it wasn't going to affect our values, our democratic policies, it wouldn't interfere in politics, and yet look where the EU ended up. About as intrusive as a parasite wanting to suck blood. Though in this particular case, it wasn't blood, it was money. And ours to a significant degree. Hell, do you remember back in the day when we had to pay £55 million gross per day to the EU? For basically nothing in return? I sure as shit do. How can I forget? Me and my mum actually voted for the Brexit in the first place, so there you go. Anyway, this guy, Farage, is a man who has actually wanted to go onto Thrills, but he's never once considered jumping back into politics. And it's a shame. He talks all the time about politics, but he's not willing to step up to be Prime Minister. I mean, given he needs a party for it. But even then, look at where we are right now in this country. Other than the fact that I'm standing in the middle of a park in the middle of nowhere. Anyway, think of where we are right now. We have, as of right now, 2 parties who are the main front runners in this country. One is unrepresentative. Well, actually, no, both of them are, if you really want to get technical. Anyway, one of them is unrepresentative, and one of them is simply unelectable. Unless, of course, you're part of Hezbollah. Yeah, I will bring that up. Jeremy Corbyn, Corbynite, the one who said that Hezbollah were his friends, as well as Hamas. Yeah, a guy who sympathises with terrorists as a Prime Minister. That wouldn't go down well, would it? I mean, quite frankly, it's a goddamn miracle Jeremy Corbyn even got into that position in the first place. But I digress. As I said, we have one party or two of them that are completely unrepresentable of the British public. Unrepresentative, even. And quite frankly, if Nigel Farage threw his hat into the ring, both of them would be completely unelectable compared to him. Because Nigel Farage, if he was actually willing to put his heart and soul into it, I have no doubt in my mind he could get the support of the British people behind him. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people would vote for him in a heartbeat, considering how useless the other two parties have been. Well, I suppose you could also count the Liberal anti-Democrats in there as well. They did run for a 4-year term. Anyway, he would be the front runner, because nobody wants these wankers other than the sheeple and, of course, Hezbollah and Hamas in regards to Corbyn. He is what I would describe as the Prime Minister who doesn't want to be. And I really do think, solidly, that is a perfect description of Nigel Farage. He could be Prime Minister if he put his heart into it. Hell, it seems fucking destiny is calling out to him. And he's denying it, metaphorically speaking. Given we make our own choices, we make our own paths, we make our own destinies. But even then, sometimes it's like having a little voice that's telling you, this is the path that's laid before you. Take it with both hands. It's like when I first supported TR, and I realised that this is the path that's been set before me. And of course, a certain someone wanted to steer me away from that path. A certain someone who blackmailed me, basically, into closing down the channel, or they disowned me. But I don't want to talk too much about my family, because that's not what it's about. The point I'm trying to make here is, Nigel Farage, this is my personal message to you. You really need to get back into politics. Because trust me, you are missing out on a golden opportunity here. Think back, Nigel Farage, to when you basically forced David Cameron to give us the EU referendum. That if it weren't for you doing that, we'd still be stuck in the European Union, unable to govern ourselves. We would be restricted in how we could control our borders. Though, to be fair, there are still loads of migrants coming in outside the borders, coming in illegally. It's not stopping them. But at least we'd have been able to control the ones that were coming in through the legal route. And we would still end up paying the European Union 55 or more million pounds a day. Obviously, that's gross. As far as net would be concerned, it would probably be more along the lines of 44, 33 million pounds. But even then, it's still way too much, in my opinion. But you, Nigel Farage, you really do need to get back into politics. Can't even get the words out now. I'm sure he'd do a better job than me at that. Anyway, he needs to get back into politics. You need to get back into politics, Nigel Farage, because this is a golden opportunity for you. And you don't get a lot of those in life. You don't get a lot of opportunities where you can say, I am being granted a gold mine of opportunities. And if I was in your shoes, I'd be taking that opportunity with both hands. And you bet your ass I wouldn't fucking let go. There are so many people out there crying for help. Maybe not literally, but metaphorically. Deep down inside, there are a lot of people in the United Kingdom who are calling for change, who are calling for new leadership, who are calling for new direction. And you, Nigel Farage, could be the one doing it. Hell, nobody likes Corbyn because of the fact that, well, he's a terrorist sympathiser, put simply, and the fact that he's just plain fucking useless. Which means your only real opponent, as of right now, is Boris Johnson. And look how he's turned out. He's turned out to be a green communist, which I guarantee you, if you put that out there in a political debate, it would completely undermine Boris Johnson's credibility. He's more interested in this fucking climate change nonsense, instead of actually fixing the fundamental problems in the United Kingdom, with a corrupt police force, a corrupt media, and of course, the crooked politicians that already are in the Houses of Parliament. Whether it's Lords or the House of Speakers or whatever, House of Commons, sorry, I'll get it right eventually. Anyway, whether it's the House of Commons or the House of Lords, there are so many corrupt people in there. And I reckon Nigel could weed these bastards out and actually fix this country. If all else fails, we would have to find Anne-Marie Waters. And I think she hasn't really stepped up as of late. She hasn't really put her voice out there on full blast, if you catch my drift. She could be doing more. But if you got out there, Nigel Farage, I reckon you could rally a lot of these patriotic parties under your cause. And I reckon you would have a really good shot, at the very least, if not a guaranteed shot, at being able to become Prime Minister. Of course, this is just my humble opinion and is merely subjective. Take it as you will, Nigel Farage. But I assure you, this is one of the very few times where I actually give a personal message to people who I think genuinely deserve the support, or at the very least should be supported if it helps the country, which I believe you would. Speaking of people to support, I've actually put in my demonstration? No, my donation even, what little I can afford, to David Perry, on a side note, who, this man, let me put into perspective Jamal again, how I mentioned that he earned, and it was actually 150k plus, he was actually on £157,000 when they finally closed shop. That thing had been going on probably a week, 2 weeks at most. And the boy who had water poured on his face, and it was in no circumstances a waterboarding attack, because that would be implying torture. I think what Bailey's family went through was pure fucking torture, in my humble opinion, and bluntly speaking. But nobody ever talks about that, do they? But this guy, Jamal, got 157k for having a bottle of water poured over him that the mainstream media over-exaggerated. And then he got caught. He got a court case that he won because obviously the judge was biased against TR. So he's probably received more along the lines of like 300, 400,000 pounds over having a bottle of water poured over him. And yet, David Perry has only received 42,000 as of late. It might have gone up a little bit more since the last time I checked. The fundraiser was, I think, yesterday or the day before. But compared to Jamal, even if we were to just take the original fundraiser, he's barely raised over a quarter of what that boy has, and he risked his fucking life. He locked himself in what I can only describe as a death container and survived. 1 meter away from the explosion, point blank range, as close to the bomb that the terrorist, the Islamic terrorist, because you're not going to convince us with that Christian bullshit, that was only on his application to try and get asylum here, and then it was denied, and he still wasn't deported, so he was here at our expense, and then he was on a watch list, and then the usual mental health spiel. But I'm going off on a tangent here. This Islamic terrorist had an IED a meter away, as close as you could ever be to this bomb, and the fact that Bailey walked out of that thing, well, the fact he even got out the fucking car, let alone walked away from it, is a goddamn miracle in and of itself. And frankly, if anybody deserved the 157,000, it's that guy and not Jamal. I made that very clear when I left my comment on the GoFundMe. It shows how crooked our media, our government and the police really are. Now, the other thing I wanted to talk about, moving away from Nigel Farage and the fundraiser and what have you, is what's been going on in Croatia, Belgium and Austria. There have been some significant protests. Very significant, in fact. Because it's regarding Poison XIX again. Mainly, and predominantly, they're trying to introduce the Poison XIX passes. Yes, they are literally introducing passes into those places. And Austria, I actually read up as well, were thinking about forced medical treatments. That's right. They are forcing people to... Well, sorry, they're not doing it yet. It's more something they're going to implement in February. My apologies. February 22, obviously. But they were thinking of implementing in 2022 February forced medical treatments, where you have to have the antidote. Otherwise, you're breaking the law. How do you think that's going to work? I'll tell you how it's going to work. Fucking horribly. It's going to go up in their face like a stick of dynamite, and it will blow everyone away, in my humble opinion, which, as I said, is subjective. But there are major protests going on, basically anti-lockdown, anti-pass, anti-Poison XIX, whatever you want to phrase it as, that are happening across Croatia, Belgium and Austria, and some of them have been getting nasty, as the BBC put it, where fireworks have been thrown at the police. But this comes down to what I said before. The police need to be asked this fundamental question. Who do you serve, your people or your government? And then you will have your understanding of my humble opinion on this all. If they really do serve the people, and they actually disagree with this as well, but they are in fear, then they need to simply wake up and actually realise that you could actually be part of the solution and not part of the problem. If you genuinely care about your people, you would actually understand where they're coming from. You wouldn't be using water cannons, you wouldn't be using tear gas, and you try to keep the peace as best as possible. You would actually understand your people's frustrations. And you may even, dare I say it, join them. As this juice is going to join me in my stomach. Anyway, you would actually join them if you actually had a bit of decency and integrity about you, if you cared about the situation. And to those who say that they serve their government, well, quite frankly, you're bringing it on yourselves. I have always been against crooked police forces. It's a bit like how when I went to those protests in London and Manchester, supporting you-know-who, and they were actively going out of their way to target people they perceived as far right, pulling batons out at the first sign of overexcitedness, unprovoked attacks on unarmed, peaceful people. Yet when it's a left-wing protest, it's all kid gloves and no harm unless they're attacked first. But as far as the other police forces are concerned across those three countries, as I said, if you care about the people, you'll support their cause, or the very least sympathise with it. If you support your government, then I frankly only have this to say, and that is any harm that comes to you, you've only brought upon yourselves. I don't advocate the violence, far from it. I don't approve of the fact that people are getting nasty with the police and throwing fireworks and shit. But, I've always said this, I completely understand why they would take that stance. That's always how I've approached things. Always has been, always will be. I'll repeat it to my dying days if I have to. But I completely understand why they would get violent, even if I do not approve of them being violent in the first place. I don't want to repeat it, so I won't bother. If people are going to say, well, you're advocating for violence, they'll say it anyway. But I know deep down I don't advocate for violence against anyone. I've made that point many, many times, and I'm not going to fucking repeat myself, bluntly speaking. And to the British government, who are thinking about these Poison XIX books, and I think you know exactly what I mean. I'm not talking about those red books you use to travel from country to country. But the Poison XIX books, they are being considered. Even though Saki Javid said that it was not going to happen, basically. And then the U-turns. There are more U-turns in this government than a Tesco's car park. I swear to God. Isn't it funny how the conspiracy theorists, well, I say that loosely, the people who have basically been given, metaphorically speaking, tinfoil hats by the government, are actually turning out to be more truthful than the government ever would. They say about they'll never bring in the books, and yet they're trying to. They'll never make it so you have to have another shot, you have to have a booster shot, you have to have this many more shots. At this rate, if you put those shots in me, I'll look like fucking Pinhead, I swear to God, Pinhead, but instead of pins in his head, it'll be needles filled with the antidote. I wonder how that would look. Anyway, the government needs to understand this kind of stance is fundamentally abhorred by the British people. The British people do not want lockdowns. They do not want to be forced into taking the shots. They do not want to be forced into staying at home by a dictatorship, which is what our government currently is, even if they don't actively show it. Hell, they've even been actively saying that they are doing this, quote, for our own safety. This is not for our own safety. This is for basically controlling the people, subjugating the people. That's what this is all about. It's a subjugation exercise by the government. And I guarantee this to you. If the UK government even dares to try to bring in forced medical treatment, forced jabs, I guarantee you it'll all kick off in the UK. Forget the fucking football. You'll have to look at the real match that's going on in the streets as people march down them demanding blood. Or just demanding that this shite stops, whichever comes first. But I digress. The point I'm trying to make is the British people will not be happy at all if you decide to bring in forced medical treatments like the Austrians are trying to do in February 22. That's what you need to understand, Bojo. Even if, let's say, a snap election is called and you win, for the sakes of argument, you still have to face the British people's wrath if you even dare to try to bring in forced medical treatments. Because what you are doing at that point, just as the Austrians are doing to their own people, is you are taking away their freedom of choice. You are taking away their freedoms full stop, to some extent. Because, as said, not only are you taking away their freedom of choice, but you are basically denying people the freedom and the right to live their lives. Because now it will be a matter of, you have to have the shots of the antidote or you'll be arrested. Who wants that? It was archaic, to say the least, to have the British police going around in their face nappies looking for people. Oh, he's not locked in, we better lock him up. Like, fucking hell. Just thinking about all those people who are like, locked down or get locked up. That's almost a BBC slogan right there. Maybe I should be hired to make up some more slogans for them. Anyway, that is basically what they were doing in the UK. Anybody who was not adhering to the lockdowns when Poison XIX kicked off, they would arrest or tell them to go home, or even fine them and their businesses like thousands of pounds in some cases if they decided not to adhere to the lockdown rules. Does anybody think that's okay? Because I don't. To some small extent, I could understand raves, illegal raves that are illegally organised. To a small extent. But it does not justify anything else. And I feel sorry for those Austrians. Oh, and do we also, speaking of Austrians, what about the Australians? Those poor saps who, there have been major protests in Melbourne, which the people are understandably not wanting this shit. Just want to make sure I don't hit the volume buttons, because otherwise I'm going to end up ending the video. Anyway, there are major protests in Melbourne as well. Hell, the Aussie government even decided to go with this policy of, if you haven't had a shot of the antidote, they'll cut you off benefits. That's right. If you don't have the shot of the antidote in Australia, you could basically be denied money that you could then use to get food, to get water, to keep you sheltered in a house, to keep it heated, etc., etc. They would willingly cut their own people off the dole just because they haven't had the shots. I wonder if Boris Johnson will listen to this and understand how fundamentally wrong this all is. Whether it's in the UK, whether it's in Austria, Croatia, Australia, or any other part of the world, surely somebody with more than 2 working brain cells, which I only have 2 myself, but I digress, anybody with 2 or more working brain cells is going to understand that all of this is abhorrent. All of this is fundamentally wrong on a massive scale. I wonder what would happen if the British government tried to cut people off benefits if they hadn't had the shots. Which is just as well I've got a job at the moment. Anyway, I wonder what would happen if they were cut off the dole just because they didn't have the shots of the antidote. I'll tell you what would fucking happen. There would be uproar. There would be violence. There would be chaos on the streets. Because as lazy as the British people are, the one thing they won't stand for is having their livelihood cut short. This is not just a matter of whether you are left or right wing. Nearly thought I was going to get run over. Anyway, this is not a matter of whether or not you are left or right wing. This is a matter of human decency. This is a matter of humans' livelihood. And what we're seeing right now is the potential collapse of that. I haven't said that Boris Johnson will put this in, whether it's the dole thing or whether it's the forced medical treatments, but it's a very real possibility, considering we're already under a tyrannical government. I actually thought I said that wrong, but no. This is the worry I have with this country right now. We're already under a tyrannical dictatorship of a government that wants to strip away our human liberties while giving economic migrants and any other person that comes to this country from a foreign country a place to live, a place to stay, a nice healthy check, metaphorically speaking, which they can use on whatever they want. They'll get a nice house, they'll get nice benefits, while the ordinary British person is often persecuted for who they are. And I ask you once again, is that okay? And in my humble opinion, I don't think that's okay at all. This is why we need to challenge our government. We need to challenge the corrupt establishment and the media and the police. And we need to take control of those broadcast stations and broadcast the truth out there. Because at the end of the day, what I'm saying is not inciting hatred. It's not inciting violence. I am putting into perspective how much better off other people are compared to us. I am putting into perspective what our crooked government, police and media are doing. I'm putting into perspective the dangers of what could happen if they do go down the route of cutting you off benefits if you haven't had shots of the antidote, or if they decide flat out that you are forced to have the antidote or you are breaking the law. And I'm putting into perspective just how tyrannical this government's approach has been and how it still is tyrannical, generally speaking. The British people are not going to sit here and tolerate being used as a public doormat by these cunts, bluntly speaking. We, the British people, will not stand idly by while this lack of equality that they preach about so much is actively being demonstrated. We are not going to sit here and do nothing while the government takes away our freedoms. That is simply not going to happen. We will fight for what we believe in. We will fight for our freedoms, just like the grandfathers and forefathers who fought 2 world wars and died in have fought for, who would be digging themselves to the earth's core if they could see how crooked our politicians have become and how they've sold out our liberties, the very ones that they fought for. And I think they would want to kill themselves again if they could see what's going on. But the only way it's going to change is if we have people like Farage running for power to hold the establishment's feet to the fire, as I keep saying, to make sure that Boris Johnson and his ilk and the Corbynite is taken to task, just like the sunlight's taking me to task. Anyway, people like Farage should take these wankers to task for their crimes against Britain. Something fundamentally needs to change. What will happen, do you think, if we are forced to have these treatments? I know what's going to happen. As I said, I think if the establishment threatens it, I think there's going to be a revolution. But what if there isn't? What if people let this continue? Like Project Fear and all the other bollocks that's been going on. I'm worried that the British people will end up being completely subjugated. And I don't want that. Nobody here deserves to be subjugated. Nobody. And my voice is gone. Anyway, nobody at all deserves to be subjugated. I will keep saying that until I'm blue in the face. Because the way I look at it, if we don't fight back against this, if we don't actually reclaim what's ours, and we don't fight for our country, then we will end up locked in a cage made of our own homes, subjugated by our governments, because we were too scared to speak out against corrupt politicians. My name's Stabima, also known as Abba the Rex, and I am, as always, very, very bad news for our corrupt establishment, fake news media, and of course, the wankers in the Austrian, Croatian and Belgian governments that want to force their own people to lock down, obey like good little sheeple, and in Austria's case, potentially bring in forced medical treatments to take away the people's freedoms. Almost said British. The Austrians' people's freedoms. Let these riots be a warning to you, Boris Johnson, that what's happening in those three countries could very, very easily happen here if you decide to take up Australia's policies of no jab, no dole, or Austria's policies of no jab and you get arrested and locked up. Mind you, you guys have already been doing a good fucking job of that in the past when you're trying to get people to go home or get locked up. I do not envy your position, Boris Johnson. Thank you for watching and have a wonderful day.